The rift between the US and Ukraine over Russia shows no sign of narrowing anytime soon. White House officials have accused the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky of insulting Donald Trump, and a planned news conference between Mr. Zelensky and an American envoy to Ukraine and Russia was cancelled yesterday. The Trump administration criticised President Zelensky for his refusal to strike a deal on access to his country's minerals and said President Trump is very frustrated. US National Security Advisor Mike Waltz has urged Kyiv to come back to the table to negotiate a deal on Ukraine's mineral wealth. Let's get the latest with our Ukraine correspondent James Waterhouse, who is in Kyiv. James, welcome to you. What's your assessment of what appears to be a deepening feud between the US and Ukraine?
Well, I think you have to imagine what it must be like for President Zelensky at the moment in terms of the political position he finds himself in. You have an America which is criticising him for not accepting a deal, as you say, which would have given it access to half of the country's natural minerals, which Washington says should be used to pay it back for the military aid it's given to date, and to pay for future security guarantees. You have European allies scratching their heads as to how they could plug a gap left by America. There is division over whether they will send troops to Ukraine after a ceasefire is signed to enforce that agreement. And of course, overall, you have Washington warming to Russia, warming to Moscow, prioritising it in these peace negotiations that President Zelensky is not part of at the moment. So he has a tall order. In the past, he could rely on battlefield success, but that was a long time ago now. And I think the sort of status quo of Russia both keeping hold of Ukrainian territory and making grinding gains notably in the east of Ukraine, that's fed a fatigue that has now crept into certainly American politics. And I think what we're hearing from the White House goes beyond strategy. This is a change in values which leaves Ukraine very much isolated at this moment in time.
Yeah, isolated, but it does have its European allies, at least in the form of France and the UK, and their leaders heading to Washington to hold talks with President Trump next week. How much influence do you think they are likely to have? I
think that what will help their cause is a proposal as to how it will increase its defence spending, which is something Donald Trump has been argued for a long time, in his first term certainly. If European leaders can show they are spending more on defence, if they can come up with a plan as to how they would offer security in Ukraine, then that just might buy them a bit of leeway. But what European leaders want in return is America's guarantee, because there is a nervousness on the continent that if America pulls its troops out and Europe increases its defence spending and defence operations, it still can't do it without America. It wants to know America is there in case Russia doesn't stop at Ukraine and Russian aggression continues, not least because of a more friendly relationship between these two superpowers, with Europe and Ukraine caught in the middle. So these are interesting political times, and it really does feel like America isn't just adopting a transactional approach to security in Europe and Ukraine, but it's also flexing its muscles. And we really are seeing an upending of the security world order as we know it. But we must not forget that Ukraine is still fighting this war. Russia is still invading it. And its future is far from assured, not least with the political turbulence we are seeing now. OK,
James in Kyiv, thank you. Well, the Foreign Secretary David Lammy has said the UK would act as a bridge between Europe and the United States. There are growing calls for an increase to the UK's defence budget. The former head of the British Armed Forces has said the UK and Europe must step up to the plate to guarantee Ukraine's sovereignty. Liberal Democrat leader Ed Davey was speaking to BBC Breakfast and has urged the Prime Minister to go further.
This moment is one of the most serious moments I can remember for Britain's security and defence, with our closest ally, the United States, now supporting Russia, it seems, and removing itself from the defence of Europe, including the United Kingdom. So we've got to make the defence of our country a top priority. All the parties at the last election said they had an ambition of going to 2.5% of our national income spent on our Army, Air Force and Navy. I think we should now do that rapidly with a clear timetable, certainly in the next 2 or 3 years, and then start talking cross-party about going even further. The situation is so serious.
Let's speak to our political correspondent, Harry Farley, who's in Westminster. Harry, good to see you. The issue of defence spending, an increasingly urgent one. How quickly could they ramp it up if they choose to do so?
Well, I think we should be clear about what we're talking about here. The UK currently spends 2.3% of its overall economy on defence, and the talks to go to 2.5%. That's what Ed Davey was talking there. I mean, that would be an increase of sort of around £5 billion. So it's a significant increase. And then that's before we get on to those who are calling for the UK to go much further, say to 3%, which would be around £20 billion. So these are large sums of money. The question that immediately is then asked is, well, how would you pay for it? And that is not yet clear. That you heard from Ed Davey there, the leader of the Liberal Democrats here in the UK. They're proposing an extra tax or an increased tax on digital services, essentially on large digital companies such as Google and so on. That tax is currently at 2%. They're suggesting raising that to 10%, so a significant extra tax. No word from the government on their thoughts on that, although I think it's fair to say that the government has talked a lot about growing the economy and a growth agenda, and it seems unlikely that they would want to impose an extra tax like that. But that leaves the question open as to how you pay for that extra defence spending. The government has said that they are committed to setting out a path to reaching that 2.5% figure. No timeline on when that will happen, or no deadline for when they would actually hit that target. And that all you mentioned, the former chief of the defence staff, General Sir Nick Carter, talking about the armed forces being in a process of neglect for the last 30 years, and said that they are remarkably hollowed out. So I think that focuses mine and gives you an indication of the scale of frustration among military leaders, certainly, at the state of the army. All that in the context of obviously the Prime Minister wanting to, or saying that he is ready and willing to put UK troops on the ground in Ukraine to guarantee any eventual peace deal that is reached between Ukraine and Russia.
OK, Harry Farley in Westminster, thank you.